Welcome to Christian Answers. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and today we're going to be looking at a passage in the book of Psalms in the Bible, and it's related to what we watch on television. It's related to what we watch in the movies. It's a passage that reminds us that we have to be careful what we watch. It says, I will sing, this is Psalm 101, verse 1, I will sing of your love and justice. To you, O Lord, I will sing praise. Verse 2, I will be careful to lead a blameless life. When will you come to me? I will walk in my house with a blameless heart. Verse 3, I will set before my eyes no vile thing. The deeds of faithless men I hate, they will not cling to me. I want to talk about verse 3, I will set before my eyes no vile thing. That is a reminder to all of us that we are accountable, we are responsible to God for what we watch with our eyes, with what we take in, what we input. There are people today who say, well, God doesn't really care what we watch. God doesn't really care what we input, just as long as we live a good and decent life. Stick to the moral standards. It doesn't matter what we actually watch. It doesn't matter what our appetites are as far as visual, what we want to see on the big screen. For example, they say, it's perfectly okay, perfectly acceptable, no problem to basically input any kind of movie that's out there, except, of course, maybe pornography. They would make an exception for that. That's an obvious violation of this verse. The verse says, I will set before my eyes no vile thing. If you hold to the moral standards of the Bible, if you hold to moral Christian teachings, you will see, obviously, that pornography, that is sex between these actors and actresses, is immoral, it's wrong, it's sinful, and no Christian should ever be involved in consuming, buying, viewing pornography of any type. It goes for Playboy magazines, it goes for Penthouse magazines, it goes for internet porn, all of that. That's so clear and obvious that I don't think you're going to have a Christian argument in favor of that. But what you will get from time to time is some kind of an apologetic for watching some of the most violent movies that Hollywood puts out. And you'll get Christians trying to defend that and say, well, that's just realism. That's the way the real world is. If you, for example, I think of the most glaring example of something totally unnecessary that is actually being consumed by millions and millions of people, and that is the recent release of this movie called John Wick, the John Wick series, starring Keanu Reeves. And he is an assassin, and he goes around killing hundreds and hundreds of men, shooting them in the head or shooting them in the chest, mostly in the head with his gun at close range. And so the latest installment of the John Wick series is John Wick 3. So what would you expect? Well, you get more of the same. This gratuitous violence, you get this constant violence with guns, shooting people in the head, blood, spattering, stabbings, just minute after minute after minute after sequence of fighting and killing and assassinations and shooting people in the head and so on and so forth. It's just violence after violence after violence. It's just totally despicable. It's totally unnecessary. I mean, there are movies that use what happens when people fight. And for example, if you have a for example, the Gladiator movies, there is violence in those movies, but it isn't to the point where every scene or every other scene is violent. There's actually a plot, there's actually a storyline going on in the Gladiator movies, the same way with Braveheart, some of the movies about war, Saving Private Ryan. Yes, there was blood and gore and violence in Saving Private Ryan, but it was in the context of the realism of World War II. And it wasn't continually, it wasn't a constant thing. There were sequences where there were these violent exchanges, battles that were taking place. In a war movie, of course, you would expect that there would be people dying. But it wasn't nonstop violence from the beginning to the very end, and just almost a celebration of killing and celebration of violence, as it is in this John Wick 3 movie that's out. And so no one should be endorsing this movie as a Christian. No Christian should actually be enjoying watching this whole thing. No Christian should actually be sitting through the whole thing. Now, I can understand that if you go into the movie theater, there's a lot of hype about the movie, you're interested, and you go with family or friends and you start watching this. I can well imagine a Christian family just getting up, or a Christian person, an adult, a couple, just getting up, walking out, saying, hey, this is not what we're supposed to be doing with our time. This is not what we're supposed to be doing with our eyes. What does the verse say? It says in verse 3, I will set before my eyes no vile thing. I will set before my eyes no vile thing. Now, that applies to television, that applies to internet, that applies to movies, it applies to real life. You don't want to go places where you will be exposed to vile things. I heard that the pastor Hybels of the famous Willow Creek Church in South Barrington, Illinois, outside of Chicago, I heard that back in the 80s, when there was an investigation into pornography, that he was called upon to be on a panel or be a part of some kind of group or committee that would investigate pornography. And according to testimony, I can't vouch for the reliability of the testimony, but according to these testimonies, Pastor Hybels, actually had his personal assistant at the church office go out and get pornography so that he could watch it. And you want to ask yourself, what? Do you have to view this filth to understand it? Can't you have a description given? Can't there be some kind of objective report written up? Do you have to go out and rent this? No, you don't have to. That's foolish. It's just stupid. It's just utterly inconceivable that a pastor of any size church, I mean, this guy was a big mega church pastor, but even a small church pastor, you'd never want to put this stuff before your eyes. You never want to immerse yourself in that filth. We all know what's going on. And if you need any greater exposure, you can read the reports of the people who don't have any moral problem with it, actually writing the description of what happened in the pornography films and whatnot. You don't have to go and see this stuff firsthand, because that's what we're commanded not to do. You don't put this vile stuff before your eyes. It's the same way with these movies that come out, like John Wick 3. We don't have to go see these movies to know what they're about. For example, John Wick 3, I know that the movie plot line is that among criminals, among assassins, there's this code of conduct, and you have to follow the rules if you're a assassin, I guess. Okay, so the storyline is John Wick violated one of the rules among the assassins. He violated one of the criminal rules, which is you cannot kill someone on special locations. There are certain locations, hotels, safe places, and criminals can go, and there's to be no killing taking place on that property. And John Wick supposedly violated that law, and now the criminal world, the assassin world, now has a bounty on his head because he broke the rules. Okay, so he broke the rules. And so then the whole movie is about him trying to escape death and all these assassins coming after him, and he's trying to make his way to the high council that we are led to believe are the final authority, but then there's actually another authority above the high council, and the rules change, and so on and so forth. So there's kind of a storyline that changes during the movie. Okay, we can learn all about that. We can get the basic gist of that movie. We don't have to wade through all that violence. And that's the problem, is that we live in a very vile and violent society. There's a lot of violence taking place in the real world. You look at the crime statistics, for example, of just a big city like Chicago or New York City or Detroit or LA, and you're going to be appalled at the violence that actually takes place in the real world. Okay, now on top of that, we have this kind of gratuitous violence in TV programs and movies like John Wick 3. And you have to stop and ask yourself, what is the meaning of that? Why is it that violence in the real world, the problem of violence in the real world, isn't enough? Why do people actually have to go into environments where there's this violence? Why do they have to consume this violence? Why do they have to actually long for more of this kind of violence in the movies? And if you analyze this thing, it's part of a sick culture. It's a sickness. It's a moral degeneracy, and it's a spiritual sickness that makes people long for more violence. And it's also a perverse feeding the violence problem by Hollywood. You know, I don't think consumers were actually saying, you know, Hollywood, just give us more violent movies. We really just want to see more violence. We want to see more gratuitous violence. We want to see more people getting shot in the head and blood blurting out and all kind. We just don't have enough of that. That's not what consumers were saying, but the Hollywood producers are saying, hey, we can generate some interest in our movie by including all of this, and then we can actually bring people along to want to see more of it. You know, where are we headed? Are we headed back to the pagan arenas where the actual Christians were fed to the lions, and the people would sit up in the stands and enjoy watching Christians being eaten alive? Can you imagine a situation where there's an arena and there are thousands of people, ordinary citizens of Rome, sitting back and waiting for the lions to be released on a group of Christians in the center of the arena so that they could watch lions eat people alive? Can you imagine that ever took place? Well, it did. Can you imagine a people in Rome, in the Colosseum, sitting back waiting for the gladiators to come in with swords and knives so that these gladiators would fight each other to the death and kill each other in front of thousands of people for entertainment purposes? This is paganism. This is sinful, lustful, carnal depravity. This is the results of the fall in the garden. And so when we look back on that, we say that is so barbaric, that is so pagan, that is so primitive, that is so despicable, that is not civility. That's an uncivilized age that we look back and judge those people. But yet, we're actually moving back toward that same problem when we feed ourselves these violent movies. What we're saying is, yeah, there's still that appetite for violence. Yeah, there's still a market for watching people bleed out and get killed and stabbed and beheaded and blown apart. There's still a market for that. People still have the same appetites for that. And right now, it's on video, and it's on the big screen in movies like John Wick 3. When you stop and think about the plot of John Wick 3, and you stop and think about how the movie was made, the plot could actually be legitimately produced without all of the blood and gore. You don't have to have nonstop violence in a movie to tell the story. There could be one or two scenes where they show this taking place, where they show a fight scene and they show him defeating and then killing his opponent. Boom. And the rest of it could be developed through different means and techniques, and now they have computer-generated effects and all kinds of other things, and this could be developed. But no, what happens is people begin to want to see nonstop violence because Hollywood is feeding that to them, and they think that's okay. But it takes Christianity and it takes the Bible, it takes God's Word to snap us out of this and speak to us and say, look, it says right here, I will put before my eyes no vile thing. Anything that is immoral, anything that is wrong, sinful, I will not put up, I will not tolerate, I will not bring into my home. And I've looked at this verse, and this verse is not by any means the only teaching in the Bible about violence and putting before our eyes sin and immorality. Jesus talks about this over and over again. In fact, he was saying, if you look at a woman lustfully in your heart, you've already committed adultery with her in a certain sort of way. You committed adultery with her in your heart. So it's not just the act of adultery that's sinful, it's actually the thinking of it. And you can also extend that to violence. You can say, it's not enough that you don't kill that person in the real world, you shouldn't even fantasize about killing that person. And if you're going to talk about fantasizing about killing, you need to extend it also to video games. And I've been saying this for many, many years, and other people have been saying the same thing. If you have young people who are pretending to shoot and kill people with the first-person shooter video games, you are actually committing the sin of murder in your heart because you're participating in a kind of murder. Now, you're saying, well, nobody really died, and everybody's safe. We're just pretending that we're assassins. We're just pretending. And there was one video game that I reviewed a couple of years ago. I think it's called Assassins, where you're the first person shooter kind of situation where you control this person and he has a variety of weapons and he sneaks up behind people and cuts their throat, and then he hides them in the bushes, and then he goes on into the compound and he's trying to assassinate somebody, and he has to fight through the guards, and then he gets to the person, sneaks up behind him, and he cuts their throat or whatever. Okay, if you're the person operating that video game joystick, you are pretending you are an assassin. Why are you pretending you're an assassin? That's putting yourself in the place of the assassin. You're pretending in your mind to be an assassin. You're pretending you're killing. You're fantasizing of murder. That's committing a certain type of murder, according to Jesus. I mean, I'm just repeating what Jesus himself says. He says, if you look at a woman lustfully in your heart, you are committing adultery. If you have hate in your heart towards someone, you've already committed the sin of murder. Now, obviously, you're not murdering them in the real world, in the legal sense of the word. You're not going to be going to jail because you thought of killing someone. You're not going to go to jail. You're only put in jail for actually killing that person in flesh and blood. But Jesus extends the law even further. He says, don't even fantasize about it. Don't even fantasize. Don't even pretend that you're going to kill that person. Don't even want to kill that person. Because if you have hate in your heart, it is a form of murder. If you have lust in your heart, that's a form of adultery. Okay? So if you're operating a video game where you are an assassin and you're going in, and I can well imagine, I don't know for sure, but I can well imagine there's a video game out, there has to be, entitled John Wick. And you're pretending that you're John Wick and you're going in and you're killing people left and right and shooting them in the head and everything like that. And if you, as a kid, if you're a teenager or a young person, you buy this and you really get into it and you enjoy pretending you're John Wick, there's something spiritually and morally wrong with you. Because you're doing what Jesus said not to do. You're fantasizing a sin. There's something wrong about a person fantasizing a sin and thinking that it's okay. If you're going in to a video game and pretending, what if they had a video game about adultery? And they show these guys, for example, I don't know if they've ever had a video game like this. I'm sure they do. I would be surprised if they didn't. But what if you had a video game and it's called the Chicken Ranch in Las Vegas, where prostitution is legal. And so the video game shows young men going over to the prostitution house, or the Chicken Ranch, as they call it, famously in Las Vegas or Nevada. And you pretend through this video game that you're going to visit the house of prostitution. And you pay them. You're not actually doing it, but you're doing the video game of it. Okay, wouldn't we all agree that there's something sick about that? Wouldn't we all agree that there's something wrong with that? Wouldn't we agree that what Jesus talks about, having lust in your heart and sinning in your heart, is there's something wrong with that? No, you actually didn't do that in the real world, and no, you actually didn't whatever it would be, fornicate if you're single, or commit adultery if you're married when you played that prostitution video game. But we would all agree there's something sick and immoral and twisted about that. Well, why don't we take that same logic and apply it to violent video games, and even viewing this nonstop violent movie? Why don't we do that? Why don't we apply that same principle there? Why would you want to go and see a movie where it's nonstop violence, where people are every second, every minute shooting other people in the head, killing other people violently? Why would you want to go and watch and consume that? And you can technically say, well, hey, I'm not committing those sins. I'm not committing those crimes. I'm not murdering. I'm not doing that violence. No, but you're participating in it. And the question is, why? Why do you have to have that participation of violence in your life? Because your heart, there's something wrong in your heart. There's something wrong in your spirit. For a Christian, there's no place in their life for that kind of gratuitous violence. Again, I can see if you go watch, for example, Saving Private Ryan, war movie, there's going to be violence. Okay, no problem, because it's not the heart and soul of the movie. But with the John Wick 3 movie, it's the heart and soul. You cannot deny that. It is the guts of the movie. I mean, you take away all of that gratuitous violence, that nonstop violence, and you really don't have much in the John Wick series. It could have been made into a movie without all that violence, but the writers and the producers would have to work a lot harder. But now what they've done is basically made the violence is actually the thing that attracts people to it. because it's like, wow, we can just see this nonstop killing and mayhem and all this kind of stuff. It's really, really to the point of despicable. And no one should be recommending this movie to anyone. I know that there were some popular conservative commentators that were excited about this when it was released. It's like, wow, we get to watch the John Wick, the latest installment in the John Wick series of movies. Why? Don't you have conservative values? Don't you want to conserve the good in society? Well, then why would you want to promote this kind of thing? This is not promoting the good. This is not promoting good in our community, in our culture. It's actually promoting bad. It's promoting a bad heart. It's promoting a sinful heart. We should be discouraging people from watching this. It's like, don't do it because it's not the will of God. It's not what the Lord would have you put before your eyes. It says here in Psalm, again, I will set before my eyes no vile thing. Or, in the word there, vile, there are many different ways you can translate it. One way of translating it, I will set before my eyes no unwholesome thing. Is that movie wholesome? No, not in a million years is it wholesome. I will set before my eyes no unclean thing, you might want to say. That's another way of saying it. There's different ways of translating that word, but the idea is basically the same. We really need to begin to screen out of our life things that are not pleasing to God. We really need to screen out of our television viewing, screen out of our movie viewing, screen out of our internet viewing. We need to really screen out a lot of what we're allowing to seep into our lives. We need to, in other words, sharpen up our search engines and seek out better content. Really, we can do better for movie content. We can do better for entertainment content. We can do better than John Wick 3. And I'm calling on all Christians to really use your discernment, choose better forms of entertainment. Guard your mind, guard your heart. Don't watch everything that pops up on the internet. Don't watch things on television you know that you wouldn't want to see if Jesus were sitting in the chair right next to you. That's another test that I've heard another pastor preach about. He said, would you recommend this if Jesus were here? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't want to sit there and watch it with him. If you don't even tune it in the first place. Well, I hope that's been helpful. See you next week on another edition of Christian Answers. God bless.